Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Dandelion Dynasty Book 4, Speaking Bones, chapters 44, 45, and 46, The Battle of Pon Part 3, Trace, Retrace, and Garinnafins of Dara. In these chapters, I really do not want to believe that Phyro failed and is dead. I think he may have, though. I don't know what to think, you guys. I didn't think that Gia would still be alive, but apparently she is. Barely. I don't know what to think. This didn't go at all the way I expected. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle is here in the chat and has just informed me that we have gotten through all of the bookings, so I am going to be completing this series in January, which it just feels like I've been covering these books for so long that the end can't possibly be near. We just also feel like we're so entrenched in the middle of this story still that it's hard for me to imagine that things wrap up in a way that is satisfying by the end of this book. But also I have to keep in mind, like, how far are we into this book? 77%. So we've still got like a fair amount to go. So we'll see. Okay, we start off the Battle of Pon Part 3. The setup here is to make it seem as if Cogoyelu and the Dyrenfin are who they say they are. I will be perfectly honest. I definitely called that the Dyrenfin was not who she said, but I did not call that Cogoyelu was Phyro at all. That came as a genuine surprise, and I felt really stupid because I was like, well, of course they wouldn't just like want a Dyrenfin. Like, you would have one to accompany the other to make him look like he is really, you know what I'm saying? So I just was laughing because I saw part of the plan, but I wasn't thinking clearly enough to really see that couldn't be the whole plan. But I did read the section twice. And so it's really interesting to like reread it knowing. And there are a couple of moments here where Kogo is like trying to speak, but he is struggling because of his lungs. And so he doesn't wind up speaking. And obviously this is Phyro finding a way to excuse the fact that he isn't able to talk because he can't imitate his voice convincingly. Yeah, here it is. Kogo lowered his sleeves and blinked. He tried to speak, but the mad dash through the rain to reach here had been hard on his aged lungs, and he hacked and coughed instead, bent over, his arms flopping helplessly. And, the fact that he's bent over as well is shielding his face so that they can't get a great look at him. And then the description of the other Dyrenfin is what made me suspicious. She was dressed the same as the other Dyrenfins, save that she held no weapon. Most of her face below the eyes was hidden by a black cloth. A soaked headscarf sat low over her forehead, and strands of wet hair peeked out. Her eyes shone with an intensity that matched Wee's. I returned from the second fin, she said, her voice hoarse. The Prime Minister must see the Empress. And it's explicitly said they could tell who she was by her birthmark, and her voice was hoarse because a lot of the women had been getting colds and had sore throats. And I was clocking all of this as like, oh, it's to camouflage her voice, and they drew on the birthmark, all of this. I was not getting what was really happening, though. So, let's see. We considered the request. Come with me, she said, turning around. Kogo rushed to follow her. We stopped by one of the large stoves in the back of the kitchen. A clumsy old-style stove that required coal. It had clearly not been used in some time. She took a ladle off the wall and struck it against the large semi-spherical bottom pan resting on the stove. 2 quick bangs, a pause, 3 quick bangs, a pause, another 2 quick bangs. With a deep rumbling, some machinery under the stove was activated, and the stove slid out of the way, revealing the entrance to an underground tunnel. Though Kogo's face remained unperturbed, we caught the look of surprise in the old man's eyes, and was pleased. I guess even the Prime Minister doesn't know everything about the palace. So they go into the tunnel, and then we cut over to the examination hall. Arya Mazzoti's directive that as many of the rebels be captured alive as possible was a great hindrance. It was like being told you had to fight with one hand tied behind your back. The rebels did seem to be fighting half-heartedly as well. And Shido says, it seems like your men are just putting on a show. While we was protecting the Empress in her hideout, Shido had taken on the task of surveilling defenses outside the palace walls. They couldn't trust anyone who wasn't a Dyron Finn to do their job properly. Is it because none of you want to face Phyro, even though he is an open rebellion? That isn't... The commander swallowed and wiped his face. Lady Shido, you have to understand that many of the palace guards have served the imperial family since the time of Emperor Ragan. I myself watched the emperor grow up as a child. This rebellion is perhaps a misunderstanding. And Shido says, the Empress is the only legitimate sovereign. And I love this. In truth, Shido couldn't have cared less about legitimacy. Gia was her mistress, as well as the closest thing she had to a mother. There was nothing that mattered more than Gia's safety and well-being. Even when Shido and we were still girls, they wouldn't have hesitated to defend Gia with their fists and teeth had Kuni expressed any displeasure at Gia's liaison with Otho Kryn, the steward. Gia had intimated that Phyro intended to kill her. That meant Phyro had to die. So, this bitch is just like, I'm going to say what you're going to understand, but that shit does not matter to me. Like, I am hers no matter what's going on. The mistress always kind-hearted. LOL. I mean, in some ways, but had said that Phyro was not to be harmed. Yet Shido also knew that there were certain orders the mistress could never issue, but nonetheless had to be understood. So she is definitely taking it as her saying, don't kill him, but she really does mean to kill him. And it's very difficult for me to decide whether that's true. I feel like probably after you've worked for somebody this long, known them this long, your read is true and correct. This is somebody who is like Gia's like a right-hand person. I'm going to go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt and say like, yeah, they're actually correct on this. I don't want them to be correct because I don't like the idea that Gia wouldn't be willing to say the words. You know what I mean? Like, I want to think that if Gia is intending for him to die, that she really means that shit. I want her to, like, say that with her full chest. And I'm not sure if it's just because she is so willing to take really drastic measures in other regards. The idea that she wouldn't be willing to say it, I'm not sure if I really buy that or not. At the same time, though, there's another part of me that's sort of like, well, I could understand wanting to maintain like plausible deniability. I don't really know how much that's necessary to Gia with what it is that with the position that she is in, but maybe just for her own conscience, she wants to maintain it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. But anyway, I was really like trying to decide whether or not this was the correct take. So let's see. The commander, I don't think the rebels are desperados. I think they're putting on a show. If you can't protect the Empress, I'll find someone who can. The commander bowed in resignation, more than a bit relieved that he was no longer in charge, which I did find kind of funny. That he's just like, oh, thank God, because I just really did not want to do this anymore. And you see it as a punishment, but I'm all right with it. I really do understand that kind of position. So let's see. We then go to the Empress's secret lair on her daybed, and Kogoyelu peeling off his face and revealing himself to be Phyro. Gia fucking unfazed. It's so funny how angry Phyro gets over the fact that Gia isn't reacting the way that he wants her to react. Like, he wants shock. He wants her to seem caught off guard and intimidated. And she is just not giving that to him. And he is so pissy about it. And this is not me like judging. It is me judging him a little bit, but not in like, I'm not as harshly as it sounds. I just can't help but laugh at the fact that he hasn't seemed to learn that expecting a certain reaction out of people who have consistently been able to like fool you is a pointless exercise. This woman murdered his mother and had him completely convinced that she was on his side, an ally, somebody to be depended on, a mother figure. You can't expect a true response from her on anything you do, because any reaction she gives is so calculated. She is such an experienced liar at this point that you have got to like lower your expectations regarding the reaction you're hoping to get out of her. And I just wanted to be like, buddy, you're still kind of out of your depth here. Like, this is the first sign, because throughout the conversation that they wind up having, there is more than one moment of like, I am going to have the upper hand finally and prove that she can't predict everything that I can do. And he does manage in one instance to surprise her, almost get her to change her mind about everything. But in the end, she is ahead of him still, every step of the way. So much of what he's doing here, he is claiming it is all about getting revenge. And while I definitely think that that is the case in a larger sense, I can't help but feel like the revenge that you are hoping to get, sir, is also about you proving this woman isn't actually smarter than you and can't bamboozle you anymore. Like, it's just as much about his personal pride as it is about her murdering his mother, because that's really what gets you, right? When you have been fooled like this by a woman like Gia, it's just as much the fact that they tricked you into thinking they were your friend as it is what they did. That you, for years, were just, dancing down the little primrose path that they had set out for you without a fucking clue. That's the humiliation, just as much as everything else. So I feel like what he wants here is to prove himself in a different way. And because he wants to prove himself like that, he is setting himself up to be tricked again in a totally different direction. And it's just really hard to watch, because like in combination with her like drawing things out and distracting him, he has like told himself that his mother would want him to hear out everything that Gia says, so that he would fully understand the why behind his mother's murder. And all I could think was like, dude, your mother, that like, she wouldn't want you to be committing this murder to begin with. So, like, in my opinion, so like, there is no way to rationalize, oh, actually, I have to like get this to a point where my mother would approve of it. She wouldn't. She just wouldn't ever. So you are trying to satisfy your own curiosity and justify, like, rationalizing it. That, in my opinion, one could say that maybe he's right about this, but I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. And, overall, my main like takeaway in this scene is that he is still kind of immature in a way that I don't like to admit, because I don't want Gia to be right. And for the most part, regarding her evaluation of him, I think she's wrong. I really do. But there are a couple of things here where I'm like, oh God, like, maybe she's nailed it a little bit. Maybe he is proving to be a bit childish and too hung up on, what's the word I want? Like, there's a sort of like theatricality, like he wants things to play, I guess romanticism, wanting things to play out like they would in a story, the drama of it. And I am just really... I want better for him, and I want him to like ask himself. He's so self-aware in so many ways. He's so close. You know, I feel like that's really what's getting me, is like he is just so close to understanding really what his motivations truly are and what his own faults are, and predicting through that what they are going to assume he's going to do. Like, they are able to predict a lot of his movements based on his behavior in general. So he has dodged most of the traps that they have set. But then there's like, has he though? Has he? Or were those all intended to be dodged? Because she gets him thinking that he has succeeded just enough to let his guard down, I think. I think that's like what it is that she's attempting to do here. I may be wrong about that. But I don't know. It felt to me like when she's saying, oh, I should have known you wouldn't fall for XYZ, she's stroking his ego a little bit. And then, you guys, there's this whole other thing. Like, she has these letters that she's talking to him about, and is saying like, oh, your father used to write to me. And she gets up and she very like purposely puts those letters in a different spot and is like, let me move them out of the way so that you don't get my blood on them. And I was infuriated that he is just watching her pick up objects around the room and move them around. Don't let her do anything, sir. Don't let her touch anything. Don't let her go anywhere. Don't let her, like, just enough. I wanted him to stop her from moving a muscle. And he just doesn't. He just lets her get up and move and make excuses. And he only really pushes back on her when she starts to, like, call his mother by name, or use the sort of diminutive, like, pet name for him that she used to. That is what he gets mad about and, like, pushes back on. Sir, you are really missing the practical aspect. And the reason he's missing it is because she has let him believe he has caught her completely off guard, despite the fact that she doesn't give the impression that she's surprised to see him. You know what I'm saying? So, like, really, if he's putting all of his brain cells to use here, he would be able to see she's not surprised to see you, which probably means that she has some other plan up her sleeve, which probably means that she, you know, there's a backup plan. There's some other contingency plan. But nope, we can't be looking at this in a way that he just wants to win and really believes that because he's in the right, That will save him somehow, which I can sympathize with because, like, personally, I never expected Phyro to fail. I really thought whatever happens here, it's the end of Gia. And in the end, it may be. She's still alive, but barely, it seems, at the end of the next chapter, or the third chapter. So they say something about her, like, her ravings and being sort of indecipherable. So my assumption is that she's really, really injured, and it's possible that she could die at any point. I don't know if Phyro hasn't been found. And I am going to assume that he's not dead because his body would have still been there if he didn't make it, unless, like, this is what keeps preying on my mind. He used an incendiary device, and I can't decide whether or not it's the type that would be like, would it vaporize his body? You know, would it be that if he were close enough to it that there wouldn't be enough left of him to find? I genuinely can't tell. I don't know. So I have a lot of, like, back and forths internally about whether or not I think he must still be alive. But I also, you guys, you know, I want him to be alive. I'm letting that part get to me because I have just as romantic a notion in the end as he does about the way that this is all supposed to shake out. And I don't like it that I'm caught up in that as well, but this is a real, like, trap that you can fall into when you are reading a story and there are tropes that are expected and you don't even realize that you are falling into expecting them. There's nothing wrong with following a trope, and I don't think there's anything wrong with expecting a trope either. Sometimes that's very comforting. But in a situation like this, where I am fully expecting, I'm seeing Phyro as the, quote, good guy. And I have to ask myself, like, is that even fair? I feel like it's fair. I feel like he is really doing his best and learning a lot in a way that I feel as if Gia, the ruthlessness that she has displayed doesn't seem to me like it has always been necessary. Some of it, yes, but not all of it. So I don't know. I just went into this very much assuming, oh, he's going to be the one that comes out on top in this. He's got to be the person who stops Gia from completely running and outsmarting everybody and everything. And I'm starting to wonder, man, I don't know. It's like, I just want very much for Gia to set aside her personal judgments. In terms of, she is just so sure she knows what's best for everybody all the time. And this moment, I'm going to read this part. So yeah, this is when she folds up the letters, moves the box. The box's weight depressed a tiny protuberance atop the stand with the faintest of clicks. A bell in the ceiling of the antechamber chimed. The sound was so soft, one could have been forgiven for thinking the otherworldly tinkle was an illusion or the result of a passing draft. But this causes all the Dyren Finns to leap into motion. And because Teke doesn't, they realize that she is not one of them and they go and rip her mask off. She evidently has been standing there waiting for the firework to go off that would tell Mota to lay down his arms. And she yells down the hallway, Renga, do it now. But he doesn't quite hear her. When we go back to his POV, he hears something and is sort of like, I wonder if that was meant for me. But it doesn't seem like it really... there's no, like... I think he hears the word do it. Like, it's not as if it's just a sound with no enunciation. But it's so faint and so far away that he doesn't take it as being directed toward him the way it is. So we go back to this, spot with Moto, and let's see, these soldiers. Ken Liu here sort of bounces around to different soldiers and some of Phyro's friends and stuff to really hammer home the cost of the fight. And it's really hard to read in a couple of points. So we go back to Gia, and she explains why she killed Rosanna. And here it is. Was it the spirit of his dead mother calling for vengeance? Do it now. He took a step forward, brandishing his bone dagger. He stopped. His mother had always counseled him that anger was dangerous, like the smoke she manipulated. To avenge her, he had to extract from her killer a full and proper confession. To reveal the extent of the dark plot that had cost her life, he had to understand and weigh the fish. You really don't, bud. And she says, I wanted you to be ready to wield the grace of kings, to understand the need for cruelty in the service of a greater mercy, to accept the world as it is, not as it ought to be. The people of Dara deserve better. And he says, oh my God, I had been ready to maintain the peace with Ukitaasa before Soto even got there. I had called it off on my own. My mother that you fucking murdered was the one who advised me to do that. And then we jump into Gia's POV. Can it be that Phyro is already the good emperor I've been hoping he'll one day become? And before she lets herself explain everything she has done to him, she asks, let me ask you a question. We jump away again. This is when we go to Mota. Is the Emperor going to win? Moto looked at the anxious faces around him, discharged veterans, Aduan gangsters, the Raye, men and women who had rallied to the Emperor's cause. Retreat back into the examination hall, he shouted. We don't know if the Emperor has succeeded, so we have to draw their attention for as long as we can. The plan had gone wrong. 4 or 5 spears poking out of arrow slits challenged him. He brushed them aside as easily as an ox would flick away bothersome flies. He was at the foot of the tower, planting his feet in the ground and leaning against the tower. He pushed back. The tower ground to a halt. Moto alone withstood the strength of 100 men, this is going down in history. Like, they've lost, I don't care. Somebody's going to remember this. And he starts praying and is remembering on the way to Zathan Gulf, a conversation that he had where, Captain, do you think they'll remember us in the future like they remember the hegemon? Probably not. Most soldiers who die are quickly forgotten. But we don't fight to leave a name. We fight because it's the right thing to do. An arrow slammed into his back, and the pain was so sharp that his knees buckled. The tower slid forward an inch. He howled like a wolf and forced the pain from his mind, willing himself to push back even harder. The tower stopped again. He had to hold on. But truth be told, he wasn't thinking about the Emperor. The face that filled his mind belonged to Rona, and he was thinking about the last time he had seen her a few days earlier. I have a feeling that I might not see... I don't want to say it. Then don't. One should never speak words of ill fortune before taking to the air. How about this? I promise we'll never fight again after this. You and I will buy a taro farm and we'll go to the city to see new plays every month. Really? But what about your mission? Dara will be fine once the Emperor is in power. There are worthier things for men than dying for great lords who recognize their talent. I prefer to live with the woman who touches my soul. Another arrow sank into his back, then another. He could see the blood pooling at his feet, feel himself weaken. He howled again, gazing into the sky over the palace, willing for her to be safe. Ladies and gentlemen, she is not safe. So she is pinned in by the Dyran Finns. she and Mota would be able to live the life they wanted in a land of peace. Back off. Emperor Monodetu has returned. All she had to do was hold them off a little longer. The outcome was never in doubt. All Arona's fighting skills were learned on and for the stage. Beautiful to look at, but of little avail against fighters trained to deliver the killing blow. With a few deft turns of the sword, we disarmed her. Before the tumbling sword had even struck the ground, the other Dairon Finns had thrust their swords into her chest, belly, side, the blades buried deep. Guys, I know this is a fucked up thing to say, but I'm sort of glad that they both died, because there's a real sense for me of like, if something like this ever happened to Owen, I don't want to be here anymore either. You know? I know that that's probably like, in the long term, not at all a reasonable position to take, but just being honest, like my instinct is just, well, then I'm out. I'm done. You know, like I'm good. I don't need to hang around and mourn after, especially the outcome was never in doubt. I really felt like this was Ken Liu laughing in my fucking face. Stop playing in my face, Ken Liu. So she says, this is back to Gia, the question that she wanted to ask him. After the Battle of Crescent Island, you didn't slaughter the Ryuku who surrendered to you. Why? Because I needed Goztan to act as emissary to persuade the Ryuku to surrender in the face of overwhelming force. Is that it? You kept them alive out of expedience? If you had no more use for them, would you have killed them? No, of course not. Goztan had fought me with honor. She and her army surrendered upon losing the duel with no conditions. To slaughter her and her warriors in such a state would be despicable, revolting beyond the ken of gods and mortals. Dara must not be stained so. Even though Goztan could simply have been deceiving you? Even though she could have plotted to lose the duel to preserve her strength to fight you another day? I fought her hand to hand, wing to wing. That is not in her nature. Gia sighed. So that was it. Phyro did not understand the nature of the Ryuku. They were enemies to whom mercy couldn't be granted. He was still a child who saw the world in black and white, in honor and betrayal. Which is really funny. This bitch is talking about how he sees the world in black and white. And she's like, they're just enemies. That's it. No mercy. Bitch, that's as black and fucking white as it gets. What are you even talking about? Do you hear yourself? No, she does not hear herself. She is so, like, she has never encountered this Gyotan, I don't think, ever. And the fact that she is so sure he was wrong, when we know, as readers, we were in Ghostan's head, we know Goztan was willing to surrender. This was genuine. All of what she was doing was for real. It really emphasizes how Gia keeps telling herself sometimes you have to be cruel. It's out of fear. It's not necessity. And I really want to, like, for me, there's a part of me that agrees with her. I do think that there are times where you kind of have to be cruel for the long-term goals and the good of everybody. But I think she tells herself that story is true a lot more often than it actually is true. And this whole scene with her, like, questioning him, the fact that he was going to call a ceasefire. Gia, think about this. He was so hell-bent on this war. And he fights this woman. And after being, like, fucking champing at the bit, foaming at the mouth to kill Ryuku, he meets this woman and talks to her and believes in her surrender. How convincing do you think this woman must have been to get a boy like Phyro that you keep crediting as just, like, hot-headed and impulsive? He was willing to pull back and do exactly what you already wanted. That he had been fighting tooth and nail for years. He was willing to just fall back like you wanted. And it's not even about that for you, which it should be. It's about what he would have done in a hypothetical situation. And you thinking you can tell whether that would have been the right or wrong thing to do in that fake situation you invented. It's so irrational. Look at the facts. This is a boy who wanted nothing more than to kill all the Ryukyu and free his own people. And something happened that caused him to turn around and look at her and be like, wait, you're a person. Maybe this is okay. Maybe we can figure something out. And genuinely mean it, which you already didn't predict could ever happen. So you clearly don't know everything. But then what you have to do to justify your position and the fact that you don't think that he's worthy of ruling, which I think is really a smokescreen for the fact that you just want to be in charge. I really do at this point. You have to tell yourself a story about how his motivations for agreeing to do the ceasefire were too corrupted. So you wanted a ceasefire so bad. You wanted to try and maintain this peace. But even though he agrees finally, it's for the wrong reasons. And he should have just been willing to do like the merciless thing, the heartless thing. And that would prove he's a good ruler. Like, girl, you're fucked up. You're wrong. This is like, what are you even talking about? And the whole thing, like, the way that she twists herself in knots to, she's saying like, I wanted the ceasefire, but also you should have said that we would have a peace treaty and then slaughter them all. I really want to know what you thought would happen if he had done that. What the other Ryukyu would have seen it, and that would not have maintained a ceasefire. Like, how does that situation even work in your scenario? I don't even get why you're asking if he would do that, because to me, that like lane of action does not at all align with what you have allegedly wanted. So I'm not getting it. What did you want him to do? Anyway. So it ends like this sort of like moment between them ends with the Ryukyu at this moment. Against them, Dara needs an evil empress more than a good emperor. And she shuffles backward, and he comes at her with the knife, not noticing that the bead curtain behind him is moving. And he falls into a trap underneath a carpet. And there are these spines at the bottom that have poison on them, not to kill him, but to disable him. Now, this is the thing, is like, if he had been disabled from this drug, he must still be alive. Well, so my instinct is like, either his body got blown to smithereens and there's nothing left of him. He couldn't have run away. He couldn't have like gotten out of here. That drug fucked him up bad. There was no way that he was like setting off an explosion like this and being able to run away. He was not in the state for it. Gia wanted him alive. She said, and I think in the end it's true, really, that she did want him alive and that other Dairon Finn was not reading her correctly. So is he just hidden somewhere in the palace? Did she take him prisoner? Like, I don't understand why she would, what she's planning to do with him. So this is when Phyro hears her say, like, don't hurt him, he's harmless now. And he pulls out this pot from under his robe. Arona is dead, as likely as Mota. I failed my companions, dear friends who had given me all, who have seen me as I am, as I wish to be. Men should be willing to die to live up to the stories they wish to be told about them. And it says, ugh, guys, slowly, as though moving through some viscous liquid, he freed his feet from the long, bloody bamboo skewers. Ugh. With the last of his strength, he leapt up, holding the pot tight against his beating heart, slamming the triggering mechanism home as he reached the rim of the pit. The Dyren fins jumped on the rising emperor. In the heart of the pot, the oge jar broke, and sparks arced through the darkness of the tightly packed firework powder. Heat, bright light, expanding gas, a grand explosion that heralded the creation of a new world and the ending of the old. That had to have killed him. It was right up against his heart, right? Like it had to. He's not alive. If Gia was as far from the pot as she was, and she is so injured she can barely speak coherently, there's no way he's right up against that and he's okay. I don't see it. Okay, so then we go to Trace Retrace, chapter 45, which I have got to say feels like a really weird place for this chapter. To have this like incredibly climactic moment and then dodge away for like an extremely short chapter with Thera and just basically them figuring out how to play voice portraits, like actually play them out loud. It was just such a way to break up your momentum. I really hated this. But what can you do? So the whole way that this is described is again an instance of me like taking his word for it. Under the needle, instead of a blank roll of Garinifin's stomach lining, as would be found in a spirit portrait taker, lay Takval's spirit portrait. And it says the thin translucent membrane seems so delicate and the wingtip needle so sharp. The idea that this last trace of her husband, this final portrait of his inimitable voice, could be at risk filled her with terror. And they play it, the needle pressed into the layer of hardened glue ash over the tape, the tip resting inside the serpentine groove down the middle. As the tape wound on, the needle retraced the path sketched by Takval's final words. And Sataari says, Kami realized that rather than trying to read the portraits of the dead like wood scars, we should be listening to their voices by retracing the steps of their vocal dance. The ear that hears vibrates in sympathy with the throat that sings, and she cranks it, and then all of a sudden, his voice begins to come out of this machine. Now, I am 100% willing to believe that this is working, but I really, I'm going to tell you guys like the truth about my understanding. I was not getting what they were doing when they took his voice at his death. You know, his voice portrait, spirit portrait. I thought he was simply exhaling and that there was like a tube of pigment or something, and his last breath created a pattern, and that it was like art. It was just, and it has been up until this point. It's been purely a visual thing. But I do not understand how this has been made into something that can be played like this. I really do not get how this, like, one thing led to the other thing. So I am having more trouble than usual saying to myself, okay, I believe you that this works. This is the first time I've really kind of stopped and been like, wait, does it though? I am not seeing the way that they could take his spirit portrait in the first place and go backward and come up with this. I don't understand how this would even work. So it says, yeah, here it is. The son of Solian Aragos, daughter of Nobo Aragos, I serve the Agon people as Peku. Hearing the call of the cloud Garinifin, I now voice my spirit to be painted. There was no substitute for the self-authenticating voice, for the thinking breath that filled the listener's head and compelled faith. Votan, we possess the proof you need to legitimate your claim. You will have the support of all the Aegon warriors. Will you go to war? No, there is something else far more important we must accomplish first. Retrace the steps of our people. And that's how the chapter ends. And again, I just feel like we could have had that chapter somewhere else, and I would have preferred it. So then we go to chapter 46, and this is such a bummer. Zenkara is waiting for Phyro, and it's obviously something's gone wrong, and he's not coming. And I'll tell you what, guys, there is nothing that scares me as much as the idea of something having happened to someone I love and never actually finding out what happened. There, you know, like somebody being brutally murdered, horrific. Don't get me wrong, haunt me the rest of my life. But I would at least know, you know, like being able to say that happened, they are gone. This is over. There is a closure there that helps you to move on to the next part of your life. But just waiting and wondering, why didn't they come back? Where are they? This happens to so many people too. And of course, usually it's women who disappear. And I can't imagine what it's like to be someone who is the parent of or the partner of a person who goes missing and is never found. That's not necessarily going to be the case here. But as of the end of this chapter, we don't know where Phyro is. So it could be. And I really hate this for her. And it turns out that Zenkara is pregnant. Then you know what you must do, said Suka. You must carry the legitimate heir to the Dandelion throne. And while I understand this thinking, I also felt like you're flying right into the fucking like lair of the enemy here, telling them that you're carrying the heir, which is what makes you a threat, which could easily get you killed on the spot. I felt like this was a really, really bad idea, personally. So we then go to the College of Advocates. Goruruthi is here. Doman Gothu and I think Kunigaru is also here. Oh no, not Kunigaru. Oh my God. Kogoyelu, my bad. Let's see. Is the Empress ready to resume her duties? Her injuries are too extensive. Though she's awake, she must be kept in a constant dream haze to dull the pain and can't be bothered with the affairs of state. Interrogation of survivors continues. They refuse to betray their co-conspirators. If you would apply more rigorous techniques, it was this very council that abolished the use of torture with both the Emperor and Empress assenting. I'm not going to violate the rules just because it's expedient. But everyone here knows that the Empress's story is that's enough. The Empress, during brief bouts of lucidity, had been adamant that her injuries were the result of an accident, and that no assassin had succeeded in breaching the palace defenses. Though everyone suspected Phyro had been behind the nighttime attack, there was no proof. Like, I really want to believe that she has him prisoner, but I just don't see how he survived if she is so badly injured. You know, I just don't see how that could be. I don't know, you guys. So let's see. With the Emperor missing and the Empress incapacitated, the Inner Council had kept things running by consensus. So everybody's like, well, what do? We need a ruler. And this is when Kogoyelu chimes in and is like, the whole thing with Gia was that we create a bureaucracy so that if we don't have a ruler, there are still ways to keep everything running. This is exactly what she was prepping for. We our government is a machine and we just keep it running. To some of the assembled ministers, Kogo's declaration seemed to verge on treason. Yet when they pondered the words in the light of Empress Gia's actions, they seemed to mirror one another. Reluctantly, the ministers nodded in assent. And this is when somebody comes in yelling about a Garinnafin invasion. And it makes sense that they would think this, but we know that's not precisely what's happening here. So, poor Aya Mazzotti, this poor bitch. She's trying her best, but she is a disaster. The city garrison, preoccupied the last few days with hunting down the remnants of the pirate raid in Pond, was wholly unprepared for this aerial assault. Discipline held. Soldiers pushed heavy platforms. Bright bonfires roared to life. Overhead, Garinnafin circled above different districts of the city. Everyone dies sometime, Agi said. This is what we signed up for. Feeling good about dying for the Empress? Agi laughed and spat. I don't give my life for the Empress, but if I can take one of them down before I die, that's one less Garinnafin to harm my wife and daughters. A good trade. So they start to fire. And Ginki, who is the Garinnafin Zenkara is riding on, is dodging all of these. And she isn't the pilot. I'm trying to find... Yeah, here it is. Phyro is piloting. We're in position for the strike. What are your orders? If the garrison is given enough time, we won't... Phyro jerked the reins and kicked his heels into Ginki's shoulders. The young warmount snapped her wings to lurch to the side, then folded them against her body, dropping like a stone. Zenkara felt her organs rise up, threatening to erupt from her throat. Horrifying. So at this point, let's see, Phyro directed Ginki into another sweeping, wide turn as he looked around. Zenkara gritted her teeth. She imagined the palace deluged by a fiery flood. Gia would die, as would many others who had no part in Phyro's fall. How can you be so... This is a flashback. She hesitated, struggling for the right word. Open. To confront evil, one must be open to all that is good in the world, he said. It was a moralist cliché, yet she had never heard it spoken with such conviction. The desire for vengeance drained out of her. Don't attack. Land in front of the palace. I'll assert the right to parley. So we then go to the Plaza of the Four Seas. It was deserted save for the smoking ruins of a Silkmotic bolt launch platform. Kogo Yelu comes out, and Zenkara steps off of Ginki and demands to speak to Phyro. The seal of Dara is held by Empress Gia. I'm here to remove her and save Dara. This isn't the way to save anything. Will you die to defend a murdering usurper? You know the truth about Gia. The people deserve a good emperor. I stand before you not to defend an individual, but a system. The hegemon and the bickering Tiro kings all thought they were good sovereigns. They believed that slaughtering their opponents was the same as winning an argument, and that a foe defeated was an idea disproved. But experience and the words of the Anno sages teach us that even just a claim is tarnished when it is tarnished when it is enforced at the tip of a sword or from the back of a Garinnafin. What has happened to Phyro? I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that Phyro loves the people of Dara, and he would never wish to see Pan engulfed in the flames of civil war. And she has a moment and is like, yeah, he's fucking right about this. So Kogo goes on. Kunigaru rebelled against a tyrant and yielded his life to the Liuku to create tranquility so the people of Dara would not be slaughtered. He wanted the machinery of state to balance the desires of those who disagree, to resolve their differences peacefully. As his father's heir, Phyro knows that his actions will be constitutive acts for future sovereigns. What example will he set for those who come after him? Kogo's words struck Zenkara hard. The ideals that Kogo cited, legitimacy, the weight of history, perhaps didn't move her as much as they would have moved someone steeped in Dara's values from birth, but her heart vibrated in sympathy with their hold on the man she loved. She sighed. Phyro was the mirror of her soul and she of his. Love made one do strange, beautiful, terrible things. She turned and beckoned to a Phyro. He unbuckled himself and stepped down. Phyro trained the Garinafins to defend Dara, not to enforce his ambition. Do you know what Phyro would ask of you? Phyro was silent, then heaved a great sigh. Though I am Liuku, my heart, like these Garinafins, has long accepted a new home. I will obey the seal of Dara, even if it isn't held by him. And she thinks back to him saying that he would come find her to marry him, and says, it's time for me to stop interfering, to herself. Grant me safe passage back to my people, and I'll not set foot in Dara again, so long as I'm alive. There will be no more blood staining the streets of the Harmonious City today. We surrender. And that is the end of the chapter. And kiddos, I do not mind telling you how off guard I was caught. Truly, I never ever thought that we were going to be just surrendering. I really never did. I really want there to be something else happening here. I want to think, I don't know. I feel bad on the one hand because, like, declaring that Phyro would be such a better choice than Gia requires a certainty that I don't exactly have. Not really. But I feel like she has, being inside her head, she has been so wrong about things so many times now. And while Phyro has been wrong about her, he has been wrong in a direction where mostly he was giving her kinder ideals. And I would rather a sovereign who errs on the side of thinking too well of people than someone with the paranoia and the assumption of the enemy being inherently evil, which is really where Gia's at. You know, she is just so certain that there is nothing to be saved from the Liuku, and has sort of like given up on them as a race of people. And I just can't think that's better than Phyro, who was able to see enough about the Liuku when he interacted with Ghostan. He was able to see enough to really decide that I am going to work with you and see them as people. And I really, like, that's a hard thing to find in a person who has gone through what he has gone through at the hands of those people. You know, like I said earlier, he was champing at the bit more than anybody to get into this war. And the fact that he was able to see their humanity and believe in their surrender enough to actually step back and be like, you know what? Okay, let's give this another shot. That's what I would want in a ruler. And I am not certain that Gia's assumptions about how, like, he doesn't know how to be cruel enough aren't a good thing. It's the sort of thing where, thinking about it in terms of Gia's, like, I want to set up a bureaucracy to keep things running the way they need to be run, even if things don't work out, even if our ruler isn't as talented at finding people of talent as Kuniguru was. Even with all of that in mind, I would think that having a ruler who errs on the side of mercy and has like a right-hand man who is a little bit more brutal and willing to get things done that need doing, wouldn't that be preferable? And I know maybe that just sounds a little bit too much like, oh, he'll have plausible deniability and be able to keep his hands clean while still getting the horrible stuff done. And maybe that's true. You know, maybe I'm being kind of gross about it. But there is a part of me that's like, I would rather Phyro be the merciful ruler and just have like, you know, like the assistant vice principal. Or not assistant vice, just vice principal. The principal is the figurehead and the one who represents the school as a whole. But then you have the vice principal, who's usually the one who enacts all of the like punitive stuff. And he is the cop. I don't know, you guys. I feel like I set things up that way, where you have Phyro actually in charge, but then you've got some other people who are more brutal that are in the wings, so to speak. That could still work, right? I feel like it could. I don't know. There's just, for me, so much uncertainty, and I am not ever comfortable with making totally declarative statements when it comes to things of this magnitude that would affect this many people. I'm a highly opinionated person, as you all know, but those like opinions are often in the abstract, and often in like many cases, there's a real like sense of comedy to it, and I'm not necessarily being completely serious. If I'm stepping back and having to make these kinds of major decisions and actually knowing that they are going to affect tons of people, I'm going to have a really different approach, and it's going to weigh on me a lot more. And I just don't, I really, it's all influenced as well by if Phyro is really dead, and if he isn't, what the fuck is Gia doing with him? Why does she want him alive? Does she just want to like hold him somewhere and train him? Does she think that'll work? That he'll listen to her? Like, what exactly does she expect that to be like? I can't imagine. How would that even work? He would never listen. I don't think. I don't see that ever happening. And how does she just then, like, after telling everybody, oh, I don't know what happened to him, she can't just like trot him out years later and be like, okay, I got the emperor to be adequately subservient to me and compliant, so now he's ready to rule. Like, who's gonna accept that? I genuinely don't know what's happening here. No idea what's going on. So I guess we will just have to wait and see. But yeah, I am really fascinated, and none of this is what I expected. And considering how hard it is to surprise me these days, I will accept the, like, being this surprised as a pro. I am willing to be like, oh yeah, you know what? I like the fact that he completely came out of nowhere with this, actually. I see this as a plus, even though I do find it a little bit infuriating, which I can't help. That's going to happen. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this up, but thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Kyle, for commissioning this. I'm probably going to go read right away because I'm just so curious. What the fuck? And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.